In the aftermath of Iran's massive barrage of missiles and drones, Israel spent nearly a week planning its retaliation. However, when Israel finally struck, to Iran and much of the world, the attack seemed lackluster. But once the dust had cleared, the true ramifications of this historic attack are finally being known. But what led up to this event, and more importantly, what happens next?
A second major Israeli airstrike.
A suspected Israeli strike.
Suspected Israeli airstrike.
Israel has reportedly struck targets in Iran.
In the early morning hours of April 19th, Israeli warplanes did something never done before. On that day, they carried out an attack that not only defeated every air defense Iran had, but sent a strategic message about what Israel was capable of. But how did we get there? To understand that, we must first go back a couple of weeks to April 1st of this year. On that day, F-35s launched several missiles at a high-level meeting between Iranian and terrorist forces. However, this was no ordinary meeting, and neither was the strike. The meeting that was being held that day was between the commander and deputy commander of Iran's Quds Force for Lebanon and Syria, along with representatives from Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other Iranian-backed Syrian militia groups. But who are all these players? The Quds Force is the primary arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that exports terrorism throughout the Middle East. Hezbollah is the main Iranian agent in Lebanon, while Palestinian Islamic Jihad is the second largest terrorist group in Gaza behind Hamas. Representatives from several militia groups in Syria were also present, as these groups are trained and funded to help keep Assad in power. But what were they discussing? With all of these key people in one room, it is likely the meeting was to discuss how best to continue arming groups in Gaza while also coordinating efforts to relieve pressure on the besieged terrorists. As we have covered in previous videos, Iran does a lot to arm groups in the region, and using smuggling routes in Syria and Lebanon is key to its operations. But while this might not be surprising, where the meeting was taking place was the terrorists were meeting inside the Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria. Consulates and other diplomatic posts are considered sovereign territory of that country, and they're protected from attack by almost any instance. It was for this reason Iran chose this location, thinking Israel would not target this infrequent meeting of high-level leaders. That is where they thought wrong. Once the meeting was underway, Israeli F-35s destroyed the consulate with missiles. In the rubble, 14 terrorists lay dead, including 2 high-ranking Quds Force generals. The deaths of so many high-level leaders among these various groups infuriated Iran. Not to mention, many international legal scholars have concluded that the Israeli strike was unlawful due to there not being an imminent attack being carried out from it. Of course, Israel could argue that Iran was leading discussions about carrying out future attacks on Israeli citizens from there. Instead of fighting it out in the courtroom, Iran decided to settle accounts by other means. While Israel readied its forces against an Iranian counterattack, nothing could have prepared the world for the scale of Iran's response around midnight on April 13th. Estimates vary wildly due to the fog of war, but some estimates claim Iran launched around 350 rockets or missiles toward Israel, along with several hundred suicide drones. However, most of these never hit their intended targets. The U.S. estimated that over 50% of the rockets and missiles fired at Israel either failed to launch or self-destructed due to a failure in flight. However, that still left around 30 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles, and several hundred drones to contend with. After Iran started the attack, the entire Middle East basically responded to this threat against Israel. It's known that American, British, French, and Jordanian aircraft, ships, and land-based air defense sites all actively participated in shooting down targets. The UAE and Saudi Arabia also shared targeting data with these countries to help shoot them down. Of course, Israel did not take a backseat either, utilizing its full spectrum of air defense from its low-range Arrow missile family to its short-range Iron Dome. The combined effort between all these countries shot down scores of targets. U.S. aircraft shot down at least 80 targets, while U.S. ships shot down at least 6 ballistic missiles. Jordanian air defense sites and planes are believed to have felled 20% of incoming Iranian targets. All told, Israel claimed that 99% of all inbound threats were destroyed. But what was Iran aiming at, and where did that other 1% go? The primary targets appear to be 3 Israeli military bases. 2 of these are the Nevatim and Ramon air bases in the remote Negev desert. The third target was an Israeli intelligence base in Mount Hermon in the contested Golan Heights. Why Iran chose these targets was because it was from here that they claimed the attack on the consulate was planned and carried out. But what damage did Iran cause? Fortunately, as of the making of this video, there are no known fatalities from this strike. However, several dozen civilians in Israel and Jordan did suffer from various shrapnel, concussive, and anxiety-related issues from near misses and anti-aircraft fire. The Israeli military bases suffered light damage. Supposedly, the Nevatim air base had 1 unused runway hit, an empty hangar hit, and 1 C-130 transport plane lightly damaged. The Ramon air base was hit by up to 4 missiles that caused little damage as well. As for the Mount Hermon base, the only damage was caused by an access road that was hit by a single suicide drone. While the physical damage from the strike was minimal, the strategic implications were enormous. Not only had Iran carried out the largest coordinated drone and missile strike in military history, but it was also the first time Iran had ever directly struck Israel with a conventional attack. Before the smoke cleared and as the sun rose on Israel that morning, the Israeli War Cabinet held an emergency meeting. Many around the world expected Israel to conduct an immediate, harsh response to this historic attack. However, the cabinet urged constraint, and Netanyahu said Israel would strike but was weighing all its options. As the world watched with bated breath what would happen next, Israel finally struck. But it was not what everyone expected. In the early morning hours of Friday, April 19th, Israel finally struck. While Iran was expecting a massive Israeli response that could trigger a wider regional conflict, Israel did something interesting. The Israeli attack aircraft took off from their bases in southern Israel. They then went north and attacked Syrian army air defense sites in southern Syria. This is considered normal since it's like clearing the way for Israeli aircraft to continue on their mission undetected. With no one to report on their movements, the Israeli planes likely launched their payload over central Syria before returning to base. But it was not an ordinary missile. Known as the Sparrow, this family of missiles was originally built as a test missile for Israel's Arrow missiles to shoot down. However, the Israelis liked it so much that they decided to put a warhead on it and incorporate it into their military. With a range of around 2,000 kilometers, the missiles are air-launched and fired in a high arc. Once airborne, the first booster kicks in and propels the missile toward its target. Once the booster runs out of fuel, it falls to Earth. Photographic evidence from central Iraq shows just that, with at least one of the boosters landing in a farmer's field. Once the missiles neared Iranian airspace, they then had to avoid detection from the myriad of air defense radars and missile sites teeming the countryside. With Russia providing Iran with some of its most up-to-date systems, including the S-300 air defense system, Iran thought its airspace would be a tough nut to crack. However, Israel proved them wrong. 3 missiles veered into Iranian territory undetected, and within a matter of minutes, slammed into their intended target. An S-300 air defense battery outside the city of Isfahan. But taking out a single air defense battery is more important than you might think. The S-300 system is one of the primary air defense batteries at an air base that protected the Natanz nuclear facility about 60 kilometers away. The Natanz facility is Iran's main nuclear facility that helps enrich uranium for its alleged peaceful program. But why would Israel care about hitting this site? For Israel, it was probably the best move they could have done. If they did not strike Iran directly, the country would be seen as weak. If they did strike Iran, they would have to avoid causing massive Iranian casualties and further spiral the region into conflict. By destroying the S-300 battery near the site, Israel has sent a powerful message to Iran. Basically, Israel can destroy any of Iran's strategic sites if it so chooses, and the Iranians have no capability to shoot down Israeli missiles. But despite the apparent success of this powerful message, what does this mean for the region moving forward? With the tit-for-tat strikes between Israel and Iran, the region is in territory it has never found itself before. No longer are Iran and Israel striking one another through proxy forces or targeted assassinations. Now, the game has completely changed, where conventional military forces conduct attacks in broad daylight, and this is likely to be the new normal. Though neither country has threatened each other with more attacks, the fact that this is a viable option for either country is terrifying. All it could take is for an Iranian missile to get lucky and strike an Israeli population center, or for Israel to decide to hit a more strategic target that could push either country over the edge. However, this is probably unlikely for now. This is because Israel needs other countries' support in defending itself, and Iran does not have nearly as capable weapons as it thought it did. Though Israel is undoubtedly the Middle East's strongest military, the fact that foreign militaries shot down over half the intercepted targets shows that Israel cannot fight this alone. Iran was also humbled by the fact that over half its missiles were duds, and that coalition aircraft actually made short work of most threats before they even got close to Israeli airspace. But this could all still change. The fact that so many countries helped defend Israel that night could be a strategic mistake. Iran could blame the attack's failure on American, British, French, or Jordanian intervention and not necessarily their own faulty weapons. Iran could then use this public posturing to further increase attacks on these countries, territories, military assets, and foreign travelers. These actions could then provoke any of these countries to conduct direct attacks against Iran in retaliation. Another way the war could get out of control is if Iran works with Russia to develop a better strike package in the future. Though the overall strike was a complete failure, the Iranians have a ton of lessons learned on what worked and what did not. It is not without question that Iranian forces will work with their Russian counterparts to develop an even deadlier strike package in the future that, although it would not defeat Western air defenses, would get many more missiles through. Whether Iran uses the defense of Israel as a provocation for attacks on Western countries, or teams up with Russia to make their military deadlier, would be two disaster scenarios for the Middle East that could plunge the entire region into conflict. Bye for now.